Thanks very much, Rebecca, and welcome and warm greetings to everyone who is joining us here in New Zealand and across the globe. My name is Aniebietabasi Ackley. I hold a master's degree in sustainable architecture from the University of Portsmouth in the United Kingdom. In the last 3+ years, I have been carrying out a doctoral degree in architecture at the Victoria University of Wellington. From my research and using real-life projects, I am going to discuss in this seminar the measurement of IEQ at scale in a large property portfolio. There is clear evidence that with poor IEQ conditions, there is a decrease in human performance and the acceptability of the indoor environment. Research has shown that while there are many variables that impact on the comfort, the health and well-being of students in schools, lighting performance, thermal performance, acoustic performance, and indoor air quality are the 4 leading environmental variables that do not only define the quality of the indoor environment, but significantly has an effect on students' health and learning performance. When we calculate the time a child spends in a classroom, it is about 15% of their waking lives. This has attracted teachers, parents, policymakers, you and I, to be interested in the monitoring of these variables in schools to understand the combined influence on learning performance and to guide proactive asset management and investment decisions. In a world looking for evidence-based data policy decisions, data loggers are making it easier to monitor IEQ of buildings. In the past, we usually have individual data loggers for CO2 measurement, for temperature measurement, but in recent years, there is an emerging technology of combining these individual data loggers into a single sensor to simultaneously measure all the IEQ variables together. These type of data loggers may likely be cost-effective and will minimize the use of these individual data loggers. For example, in New Zealand, the Ministry of Education have at least one of these multivariable sensors in about 90 selected schools across the country. The aim is to understand the indoor condition of New Zealand schools to inform proactive asset management decisions. If this is to be a nationwide tool, collecting thousands of environmental data and considering that each IEQ variable, like the daylight variable or the CO2 or even the thermal environment, can vary in a classroom, this informed the rationale to research into IEQ measurement strategy to find answers to questions such as where, what, and how to measure IEQ in a national property portfolio. I began researching these questions by carrying out a literature review of over 300 related IEQ papers. The table shows a selection of studies that measure thermal environment and carbon dioxide measurement in schools. We can see the number of sensors and the measurement height of the sensors. While there appear to be some agreement with the carbon dioxide studies of the use of a 1-point sensor, there is a variance in the thermal measurement studies, and this was consistent with the lighting variable as well as the sound level variable. In the height of sensors, we see that the various researchers have used different heights from 0.6 meters to up to about 2 meters. These indicate the variance in the number of sensors used for IEQ measurement and the different measurement height either on the wall or at the center of the space. In all data collection projects, the location of a sensor is often the most important criteria for obtaining reliable and useful data. For example, the lighting expert usually measures desktop illuminance, but in any occupied classroom, it could be practically impossible to put multiple sensors to measure IEQ variables because of the various activities of students and teachers within the space. Therefore, the use of a 1-point sensor will suffice. I proceeded to look at the relative importance of each IEQ variable and found these many references that looked into the 4 IEQ variables in different settings. Using a scale of 0.1 to 0.5, the bar chart shows how important each of these IEQ variable is relative to the other. The aim was to ascertain whether there is a consensus among researchers in offices that differs from that in schools. The red boxes shows that there seems to be a little consensus that thermal performance is important, but not convincing to say it is the most important variable. The overall trends indicate that there is no consensus on the importance of each IEQ variable relative to the other factors. So I proceeded to explore where will be the best place to locate a one-point data logger in a classroom and how will the enormous amount of data be analyzed. Due to time constraints, I will briefly discuss the insight of only the lighting findings and a high-level summary of the other variables. I modeled a two-side lit classroom and a one-side lit space where I put an array of sensors on the horizontal plane at a height of 0.8 meters. This is about 24 sensor points, and a one-point sensor, the green circle, on the long wall and on the short walls. I carried out a climate-based daylight modeling of the whole year to ascertain whether a one-point sensor on the wall could be representative of the daylight quantity and quality across the whole space. The tiny illuminance graphs shows the green boxes shows the illuminance pattern on the long wall, illuminance pattern on the short wall, and the red boxes shows illuminance pattern across each of those different spaces on the horizontal plane. The interesting trend here is that there is a variation. If we look at the illuminance pattern of sensor F2 in comparison to other illuminance points, we see generally that there is a variation in the daylight levels across this space. But one interesting trend I found was that the illuminance pattern on the sensor on the long wall has a relationship with the illuminance pattern of the lighting levels across the center of the horizontal plane. These trends and pattern was consistent in the two-side lit classroom and in the one-side lit classroom where the illuminance pattern of the sensor in the long wall and of the short wall had a relationship with the lighting levels across the center of the horizontal plane. I went further to investigate these trends using 3 experimental classrooms with different orientations, with different space occupancy and usage in 3 different schools. And I carried out physical measurements using a single point sensor. The red sensor is the sensor at the center of the space, and the B sensors are the sensors on the wall. I found that approximately 90% of the variation in the horizontal plane sensor, the red sensor, can be accounted for by the variation in the vertical sensors on the wall, which corresponds to the result of the simulation modeling I have just shown in the previous slide. I applied the same approach to temperature levels, relative humidity levels, sound levels, and CO2. And the findings indicated that measuring IEQ at a single location or height may not be an accurate indicator or a true representation of the environmental conditions across a whole space. This was due to the factors of variability, such as the configuration of the window, the movement and intensity of the sun at a point in time, and occupant activity and space usage. But the overall findings indicated that a one-point sensor strategically located at the center of an unglazed vertical wall at a height of 1.5 meters, where the sun is unlikely to shine and away from any sources of heat, could provide a useful benchmark to predict the IEQ performance of the most frequently occupied parts of a classroom, provided these factors of IEQ variability are taken into account. The use of a 1-point sensor gives a general indication of IEQ trends and patterns. It can suggest that IEQ highs are way too high, or the lows are way too low, or the extremes are too broad. It cannot pinpoint problem causes or specific local issues, but it is useful to triage good and poor classrooms for early discrimination from hundreds of sensors of how to direct the maintenance and the refurbishment programs for large groups of school buildings. An additional level of information could be picked up better by using multiple sensors, building modeling, just as I've illustrated in the previous slide, or in combination with other qualitative methods such as survey of occupants, especially for large open plan spaces. It is one thing to deploy an environmental sensor into a space to collect data, and it is another thing to be able to make sense of the big data that has been collected. So I proceeded to develop a logical, a simple, and an insightful method to easily analyze IEQ big data. This model is developed based on 3 steps of data analysis. The first step is the IEQ scale, which uses a scale of 1:5 with green, the amber, and red. And the analytical framework I have used here shows how I translate various IEQ variables into scores of 1 being good and 5 of 1 being poor and 5 being very good. And this scale is based on the degree to which empirical studies in the literature predicted the factor in a classroom that would support learning performance. A common problem with combined indices like this is that it is possible for very poor factors to be easily hidden by other factors when aggregated to a single number. So I created a second analytical step, which is useful to red flag the individual IEQ variable that has a poor rating, and also to graphically represent the combined IEQ model using a spider plot. To effectively apply steps 1 and 2, I went further to create a third analytical step, which has a 4-phase IEQ prioritization category with recommendations to take actions. Using the analytical framework discussed so far, and working with 2 developers, I have built a proof of concept of an IEQ intelligence building application. My initiative imagines a building industry that is empowered by access to real-time building performance data that is based on well-defined and scientific and practical models. Very briefly, I will take you through the dashboard of the application. The dashboard, I have got 4 major menus. The first menu is the deployment. If, for example, a project manager or an individual goes on a school site to install a data logger, you will need to key in the information of the school, the building ID, the room ID, the sensor ID, the date, and it's going to automatically give you a summary of how many sensors are active or how many are inactive. The next is the survey menu, which has what I call the Occupant IEQ Assessment tool. This will be given to the school to fill out for each of the buildings, which has a predefined questions of, for example, rating the overall facilities in the classroom. Also has questions for each of the IEQ variables like lighting, thermal comfort, noise, and indoor air quality. The next level of data is information about the institution. You could add information about the institution, such as the school roll, the block number, and the institution number. The next level is the building information, where you could add informations about the year the buildings were built, the dimensions of the buildings, and
Sorry, okay. We are not seeing the screen.
You can see the screen.
You're sharing. Yes.
Okay, sorry, I will just reshare again. Wondering if you can see the screen now? Can you see the screen now?
No.
Okay, I'll just stop sharing and reshare again. Okay, I'm resharing. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
You can see the screen now?
Yep.
Okay, so I was
Yep.
referring to the deployment menu that has a summary of all the active sensors and inactive sensors. And the next level of data is the Occupant Assessment tool, which has the informations about the lighting quality, the thermal quality, and all the other environmental variables. The next level of information is the institution data, where you could add informations about the institution and informations about the building, where, for example, you have informations about the roof type, the cladding type, and all of this. Most large organizations may already have these informations in their assets register, and it will just be to pre-populate them prior to going to the school site to install a sensor. The relevance of all this data is to make sense of the IEQ data in terms of the trends and pattern, the context of the building, the way the occupants use the building needs to be taken into record to be able to make sense of the data. I will come to the room information. It's possible to add informations about the orientation of the building and the glazing element and the observations of the things that has been found on the space. For example, if you want to add an observation, based on my research for lighting, I've already pre-populated the possible things that could be found on a school site, where we could say the classroom, the students were using blinds for a screen activity. For acoustics, I've already pre-populated some information that may be required, and then you can click save. Under actions, you could also add the floor plan. You could add 3D images, and this is where I hope to install the functionality of BIM, the building information modeling tools, which will help to provide more context about the building. And we proceed to visualization. Under visualization, you could add a sensor which has been populated, tracked to the school name, the building name, the sensor ID. If you've got a JSON file or an Excel file, you could browse in here and you could load it to view the data. Or if you've got an API, you could put the link here and you could track the data. And we move to visualization. In visualization, you've also got the characteristics of the different spaces. And then we could click on a school. For example, I've pre-populated for the Bob Light School, having the building name, the room name. You could view individual IEQ variables. In this instance, let's view all the variables and we could click visualize. It's just going to take about 10 to 5 seconds for us to see a visualization of the data, and boom, here we go. And under, for example, under the lighting data, the framework I have used is a light levels of 300 to 2000 lux, which sits in the scale of 4 or 5, and anything out of that, out of these zones, may be either in the scale of 1 or 2. Same applies for other scales I've used for sound, for relative humidity, for temperature, and we see the radar chart showing the combined IEQ rating. For example, if a property CEO has 2,000 buildings, they may want to know to have a report for each of the buildings that has been monitored. All you would need to do is to click on generate a report, and it's going to populate the information of the school, information of the building, an executive summary, which is going to be editable text using the framework I have created of a scale of 1:5. Depending on the trends and patterns in the graph, you could edit this to see if the building is sitting on scale 1 or on scale 5. And the images of the floor plan that has been added would appear here, and the line graphs for all the different IEQ performance rating for lighting, for acoustics, for indoor air quality, and the summary will appear, and recommendation in this instance is sitting on a sweet spot of 4 and 5, so no further action is required. A CEO will also want to know what is the overall report for, I have 2,000 buildings. Which of them falls under a category of buildings where the lighting is poor or it is good? So these will now pop up to show the individual variables for the 2,000 set of monitored buildings that are either poor lighting or good lighting, and will help for them to make an investment decision. The next level is the category. A category of building in either in scale 1 or 2 will be of a high priority, and the recommendation will be further assessment or investment may be required. The next category will be 1 and 2 for the individual variable that has a poor rating, same recommendations. And then for categories of buildings in scale 3, 4, and 5, no further action. So with this high-level summary report, a CEO will know where to invest or where to put in their funds to be able to say, we want to lift the buildings that are in category 1 to category 3 or 4. I will just go back to the PowerPoint slide and you let me know if you can see. Can you see the PowerPoint slide, please? Can you see the PowerPoint slide?
No,
Not yet.
you have to click out of it and then click back into the PowerPoint.
Okay. So the PowerPoint slide. Can you see it now? Yep. So I do want to stress that the IEQ app is a work in progress. Some of the interpretations may change, and as we get more evidence-based data, the analytical framework I have developed may improve. But what I have presented is a proof of concept that it is possible to measure IEQ at scale in a large property portfolio, and that there is a scientific mechanism to easily analyze and report IEQ big data in a way that makes sense. I thought that is a really good message to share with you today. And given the potential of this app, I am open to discussions with individuals that organizations who might be interested in the work that we are doing. These are my contact details. Please get in touch for an offline conversation that may likely facilitate the development of this very fascinating IEQ building intelligence application. What I can promise is that we will have an application that has a robust, user-friendly interface that will collect real-time data, and it will provide evidence-based data to inform policy and investment decisions suited for use by organizations with a large property portfolio. It's time for me to finish and to acknowledge the people who have contributed to the series of experiments underlying this research. Permit me to acknowledge the contributions of my supervisors, Professor Michael Dunn and Dr. Jeff Thomas. I want to also thank the Ministry of Education for providing the data loggers that we use for my experiment, and also to thank Professor Louise Taki of the School of Education for her contributions. I see that my parents have zoomed in. I want to thank them for their support, and I want to acknowledge everyone from the other side of the world who have stayed late into their night to join this seminar. Thank you to everyone for listening.
Thank you for that. Really fantastic work. Good job.
Yes, thank you, Ackley. And thank you everyone for joining the conversation. And it's great to see we've got people from the other side of the world on Zoom. That's the value of Zoom. If anyone had any questions, we've got a few minutes. Yeah, just maybe.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Hello.
Sure, go for it.
Yeah. My name here is Ackley from Master University. Thank you, Ackley, for your presentation. Sorry about the background noise. I'm in a router place. I've got one question for Ackley, which is more or less like a future thought. Your app is mainly based on the indoor environment quality. That's you've looked at the four main aspects of indoor environment quality, that's temperature and so on. Do you envisage your app including other aspects of the environment, like the social aspect, or things like distractions, interactions, and so other things that could affect students in the classroom. And that is one question. And also, can your app be expanded or extended to include other buildings, not schools, like office building or hospitals and so on?
Yep. Thanks very much, Dr. Eziaku, for that very interesting question. The app is actually the first attempt to build a application that has a robust ability to analyze many IEQ variables as one. As regards other things such as occupancy or how the space is being used, that is being put into the aspect of the app I called observation note, where if someone goes to a school site to put a sensor, they could take note of some of the things that they have found on site, and also the form where will be given to the schools or to the users of the buildings to feel about how they use their buildings and the different trends. All of that is to be used to make sense of the data. But as we develop this further, we are very open to add more things into the app. And then for the question about the app is not just for schools. I've only used schools as a case study in here, so we can tweak it to be able to fit into any organization that, let's say, is trying to look at residential homes. We can also tweak it for other organizations that are looking at, let's say, health buildings and the rest. So basically, the analytical framework I have developed has been done in a systematic way that could actually be adjusted to fit any type of setting. I don't know if that answers your question, Dr. Zaki, please.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. I think we'll have an offline conversation, because this fits perfectly to some aspect of the work I'm currently working on. And yeah, so it'll be good that we collaborate somehow and see what we can get out of your research. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks very much, Dr. Zaki.
Any other questions?
I got one.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I was wondering whether you've been able to connect the indoor environmental quality aspects to the actual learning outcomes of those students in those classrooms that you looked at.
Thanks very much, Prof. When I set out to begin this research, the aim was to look out for the combined effect of each of those environmental qualities with the learning of how students learn in spaces. But what I found was that there is no metrics to look into the combined influence of these variables to now do a comparison with achievement records. So these now moved my view in terms of the app and the framework I am building, trying to build a methodological approach where we could monitor and use evidence-based data to look at the combined influence of IEQ in schools, where we can now relate that into the learning assessment data. So the next line of things that will follow will be when we have been able to use these metrics to actually analyze all those environmental variables as one, then we can now use that to compare to achievement data to find the combined influence of IEQ on learning performance in schools.
Thank you.
And if I could comment, Ackley, the issue is around measuring student performance is around consent, particularly informed consent. In a highly federated model, each school in New Zealand is effectively its own agency. So coordinating that informed consent is a non-trivial problem.
Great, thanks very much, Ken.
Okay, any final a final question? Any final questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you. Oh, was there one?
Yes, I'm Toba from University of Tasmania. I didn't join the beginning of the discussion, but I was just wondering how this research can be looked into real-time climatic data from the maybe the closest meteorological station.
Yep.
Yeah, so that I think it will help this kind of research to get a real-time data. So have you considered that, or you you are only relying on the data that were measured in a particular station? And how are you looking at how you are calibrating that with what the real-time climatic data from the weather station is saying?
Thanks very, very much. That's a very great one. So in the experiment I did, we didn't just put the sensors inside the classrooms. We also put some sensors outside, because we have an understanding that the external variation in the weather could also have an effect on what is happening inside the classroom. So we also put the sensors outside to track the whole data from the outside and also from the inside. And also we also got some data from the NEVA, which is the weather station here, and we also analyze that in comparison with the sensors we had outside and the inside. So for the app, we will work on a functionality that can track the external weather data from source, and also use.
So there's always, we can talk about that. There's always a way to extract and impute such that kind of data into what we are using in agrothermal simulation, so we can incorporate such into your research. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Toba. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again for your talk, Ackley, and if people could give him a virtual clap, that would be fantastic for an actual clap. And next week we have Lisa Tervenen talking about designing and communicating biomaterials. So she's designed a cookbook around sort of biomaterials. So that will be worth listening into then too. So that's next week at 1 o'clock. But thank you again for your really stimulating talk. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Kia ora.